Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Prater Rains. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Prater Rains have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Prater Rains are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Prater Rains website at praterrains.co.uk/liberal-democrats. Now, on with the podcast. Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. My name is John Potter and we're here now talking about an issue. We talked about campaigning, getting organised, starting from scratch. But how easy is it to campaign if you're dealing with childcare? How easy is it to be a councillor if you're dealing with childcare? So this idea came from Hannah Kitching, who has joined us again on the pod, the Lib Dem leader of Barnsley Council, of the Lib Dem group. We've also got Laura Gordon, one of our regulars, who was a parliamentary candidate in a target seat of Sheffield Hallam with a newborn baby. And we've also got David Howarth, first time on the pod from the posh side of Preston, so he's south of the river. He is the leader of the South Ribble Lib Dems and also deputy leader of the Lib Dems on Lancashire County Council. Welcome all three of you. How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
How easy is it to actually campaign? I mean, you started from scratch, you got elected fairly recently. How big an issue was childcare in that fight?
I mean, it is an issue. It's a massive issue. I mean, I didn't get involved. So I joined the Lib Dems in 2016. So my kids were sort of 3 and sort of 6.5. So the littlest one was still at home with me. So I was a full-time mum. So I didn't go back to paid work after my youngest was born. So I was at home full time with my kids. And I sort of got involved, and so I didn't really get involved in politics really until I had one kid at school and one who was sort of doing a couple of days a week at nursery. And sort of at that point, you know, made it quite clear that would, you know, that on the nursery days I would do things, but you know, on the non-nursery days, I wasn't, you know, because I have no other childcare options really. There's no grandparents, you know, within an hour and a half's drive. My husband largely works 12-hour days, you know, out of the house. We don't see him from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. Works away a fair bit, but not a massive amount. Well, not at all now, obviously, because no one's going anywhere. And I think because I was always at home full time with my kids, I wasn't really in the habit of asking people for help. So I didn't really have people who would look after my kids for me. In fact, I was often the person that looked after other people's kids, you know, because they had work commitments. So I didn't really get involved until my kids were at school. Which is fine because it gives you time, but also the school day is like ridiculously short. And the school day is also not the time when most campaigning happens. So you're looking for childcare outside of those times, you know, after school, evenings, weekends. And yeah, it's difficult.
Now, Dave, I know you're a colleague of mine on Lancashire County Council, so your two boys are now grown up. But I think you became
allegedly.
Yeah, so you became a single dad in 2001. Is that right?
Yeah.
So what describe the situation you were in? I mean, you were already elected at that point. Is that right?
Yeah, I had been on the council at that point for about 6 years, and then started 2001 through to the middle of the year. My wife at that time had contracted cancer. It was gradually getting worse, and then I was widowed sort of mid-year with a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old. I was in the cabinet at South Ribble at the time, So all of that, and in a profession as well. So all of that coming together was very much a wake-up call. And how do you continue and how do you go on from here?
And how did you? How did you balance that?
I mean, the first thing I did was step down from the cabinet, because clearly you're suddenly having to rearrange your whole life. I mean, I worked for a company that were very understanding, and I was on as much leave as I wanted. I didn't particularly want that. I wanted to try and keep life as normal as possible. 2 years later, we're then up for re-election, made a number of gains, and I'm suddenly the deputy leader of the council with a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old. Sorry, with a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old. And still having to balance all of getting them to school. It's not just the getting them to school, and it's not just the who looks after them if you're not there. I need a dress shirt 5 days a week. I've got 2 boys at school who both need a dress shirt 5 days a week. So you're looking at 15 shirts to iron. And keeping them clean, dressed and presentable as well as yourself. And
so to the opposite end, so is you, Laura. I suppose now you had, obviously you've got a daughter who's now 2, but obviously you were a parliamentary candidate with a very young child. So how did you cope with that?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure, to be honest. It's kind of, I think the whole of the last 2 years is a little bit of a fog, and it's kind of difficult to pick out exactly what I did. But basically, I got selected in late 2017. Got pregnant quite quickly after that. Ended up having a baby in October 2018. And I think one of the things that made it quite strange, obviously we had this parliament where we had no idea when there was going to be an election. There could have been an election at any time. And in Sheffield Hallam, we had kind of double that because there was this constant threat of having a by-election because of the situation with Jared O'Mara. So basically constantly through this period, I was kind of in election mode and trying to think about how I could potentially fight an election, genuinely thinking, actually, could I fight an election if like I give birth in the middle of the short campaign? How do I deal with that? So I think it was a slightly different situation in that, it wasn't about arranging childcare because, when you're trying to campaign with a sort of 3-month-old, it's not about finding childcare. It's about finding a way to be able to do some campaigning at all while taking the baby with you. So it was kind of about how did I manage that? And I think the main answers were around kind of baby wearing. So I, went to the sling library and got some slings and carried the baby and took the baby to a lot of meetings. I think that was actually surprisingly successful. I was a little bit worried about taking a baby to kind of business meetings, but actually it turns out that a lot of the people I was having business meetings with have children that are now grown up and quite enjoyed having a baby come in and something a bit different. So actually it was not as bad as I expected. On doorsteps, it was really fine, but then also just trying to be flexible as well. So, a little bit of phone canvassing here and there and things like that. But yeah, the kind of keeping on top of the laundry part sounds very familiar. I mean, I don't understand how they generate so much. They're so small. How is it possible that somebody so small can generate that much laundry? It defies the laws of physics.
I can confirm as well that Laura does have an extremely amenable and portable baby whose little smiling face. I mean, she wasn't always smiling, to be fair, but I've never seen her upset. I've been out on the doorstep with Laura and at various meetings, when her daughter was there a number of times, and I've never seen her in a bad humour. She absolutely, took it all in her stride.
Yeah, I think she finds the sound of the riser and the folding machine quite soothing. Is that rhythmic sound like that? Yeah, just pop her in a car seat next to the folding machine and she'd doze off. It was probably the only place she'd sleep, actually. I considered taking her to the office for naps so that I could sleep on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite a new campaign technique, though, when you take your baby out for other people to kiss it and not the other way around.
Yes, exactly. But no, I mean, you do sort of interact with people in a slightly different way on the doorstep. I mean, one of the things I really noticed taking her out was actually gathering signatures. When you go to your wards where you're standing paper candidates and you're trying to gather nominations, and it's usually a little bit painful because you're trying to explain to people what this is and they don't really get it. But I did it one year and I did it the second year, in a similar area. And I think it only took me about half an hour when I was there with the baby, because I think you just look so unthreatening when you've got a baby strapped to your front that people just think like, oh, a baby, yes, of course I'll sign, whatever, yes, no problem, yes, you can have my soul, I'll just sign right here. Can I just touch the baby's cheek? So yeah, actually it was quite an effective signature gathering technique. So I think if you do have anyone in your local party with a small infant, send them out to gather your signatures, and then actually they'll probably leave the party, so maybe don't do that. But so, it was quite effective.
From David and Hannah's point of view, so campaigning, how did you manage that with children in term? I mean, David, you were saying that your kids were now at secondary school, but obviously you still had everything else to do, making sure they're fed, and you were talking about the laundry. So how did you manage your time? How did you do that kind of juggle?
I think it just is a grasp of time management at the end of the day. I mean, I don't know how people are members of Parliament with young children at all. So, but I mean, after school clubs are a godsend, because they effectively get themselves there, and you don't have to pick them up until somewhere between 5 and 6. Once they get to an age where they can effectively look after themselves, I mean that. It gets easier, but there was one occasion where I think it was my eldest's 18th birthday. The youngest was still 14. We wanted to go to a football game abroad, and I'm sure that the secretary at work was going to shop me to the NSPCC because we left the youngest one at home overnight. The good thing about it, he's autistic as well, so he follows instructions to the letter of the law. And we used to keep a list of phone numbers on his bedroom wall, where if there's any problem at all, you phone that one. If there's any problem at all, you phone that one. And then we would check in with him at regular intervals to make sure he was okay. But he always was.
No. Go on, Hannah.
So I think for me, it's been a combination of things. So I've always done a lot of campaigning at weekends. For my husband works long hours. He doesn't and has never worked weekends. And so he's always around, and, because he doesn't see the kids a colossal amount during the week. And even sort of less so, when they were younger, because they went to bed a little bit earlier, he's always been really happy to have them at the weekends, and to do things with them, take them out, look after them, whatever. And so I've always done a lot of campaigning at the weekends. And then when it sort of gets down to, so that would be my standard, through most of the year. A couple of sort of after school options. So yeah, I've certainly put them in after school club, which keeps them occupied until 6 p.m. The problem we often had with that is if they're doing a lot of after school activities, so like gymnastics and swimming and dancing and choir, are always in that sort of 3:30 till 6:30 slot. So that's kind of tea time canvassing just out of the window. And then in the short campaign, I just basically ask for favours. So my default is that my husband coming home isn't an option. So sometimes put them after school club, send them on play dates. Usually for sort of polling week, my mum comes to stay, which means I can just go out and campaign sort of all day, every day from, 9 a.m. right through till it's dark. Usually at the end of every polling week, we sort of weigh up whether that was worth it or not. But that's what we've sort of got into the habit of doing. And then, in the general election last December was, as we all know, horrific for many reasons. But I have never pulled in, so many favours as I did. I just literally had when it all sort of kicked off, I basically messaged a list of friends, who are sort of parents of the kids' friends, and just said, I need someone to have these kids every day after school for me for 2 months. What days can you do? And I sort of drew up a whole rota. But that's not sustainable. That is, people did that for me because that was a one-off. That was a general election. They knew I was a candidate, and it was a short-term thing, and it was fine. And actually everyone was absolutely fine with it. But yeah, I've done a lot of reciprocal play dates, sort of since, to kind of, catch up on some of those favours. And I think for me, the biggest thing is asking for help, because I didn't used to do it. I've never needed anyone to look after my kids for me. I've never paid anyone to look after my kids. I've never relied on anyone else to look after my children. And that's been the difference for me since I've got involved with politics, having to ask for help and not doing it all myself.
Is there anything, I mean, open to all of it, what should local parties be doing to try and make it easier? Or is it down to just, most local parties don't have staff or anything like that? So what are the kind of do's and do nots you think local parties could do to help people who have childcare commitments?
I mean, I think obviously, because I was the candidate, and I had a baby, I think the local party was actually really good about trying to figure out how they could help me make it work. And I mean, there are some really small things like, we got a high chair and we put it in the office, and we got a changing mat and we put it in the office, and sort of all of these kind of things, so that actually just making it slightly easier for her to be there, and some toys and snacks and things. So I had a little box of snacks for her, and that just made it a lot easier. And I think, we'll probably try and do the same with, some toys and things, and hopefully that will make it easier for other people to be in the office. Although, having said that, the office is never going to be a particularly baby friendly environment, but things like that did really help. I think being flexible around meetings as well, because a lot of meetings just happen at these really odd time slots, and it's that tea time, bedtime time slot for a meeting. If a meeting's at 6:00, it's just really hard to go if you've got kids. If it's later in the evening, then you might be able to go if you have childcare that evening. But my husband's a doctor, so he works shift. So like if he's on nights, then I can't go out after my daughter comes home from nursery. So I can only, actually, it's a lot easier now that people are much more comfortable doing things on Zoom and things, because actually, like this podcast that we're recording in the evening, like my daughter's in bed, but like I wouldn't be able to go out to do something. So actually being willing to do things remotely, if that's something that we can continue after the pandemic, I think that would make it a lot easier for parents to be involved with the kind of evening type activities. And then I think as well, just being flexible on canvassing, because and campaigning times, because I think something that we really noticed with Hannah's campaign actually was that you did a lot of your canvassing during the day, because that was when you were free, and you were getting a really good in rate. And like, okay, that wouldn't work in some parts of Hallam, like where I live in Crooks, it's lots of young professionals and students and everyone's out during the day, so we get like a 15% in rate at the best of times, and it would be about 2% during the day. But if you're in an area where people are more likely to be home during the day, like actually if you're free between 9:30, between 10 and 1, then canvass then. But actually there can be a tendency, I think, in local parties that if you don't come for a team delivery session, or you don't come for a big canvassing session, or you don't come to an action day, you're seen as not working, even though you might be racking up the numbers. And I think that that willingness to kind of see what people can do and say, okay, what can you do, and acknowledge the work that people are putting in, even if it's not in the model that you might think, or maybe they're phone canvassing in the evenings when they can't go out, and actually finding ways to. But I think it's not even just valuing that, but actually I think also finding ways to acknowledge it, because I think one of the things that can be quite challenging is that there's this perception that someone might not be working even when they're working really hard. And so just making sure you're celebrating the work that everyone is doing, and that I think is helpful for making people feel valued as well.
There is a massive obsession with the tea time canvassing slot. Just a massive obsession with it. We'll meet for canvassing at 5 p.m. No, we won't. Because even if you put your kids in after school club, or even if they're in nursery, those settings, they close at 6:00. So, you can't do any meaningful canvassing. And as I said, I've been through phases where my kids have done something every night of the week, and I've gone through phases where they've done nothing. I sort of swing between the two in terms of kind of like guilt and total stress. But all those gymnastics, dancing, drama, choir, it's all in that evening slot, and it's just impossible. And I said this in the last podcast we did when I went on Kickstart before I got elected. So this was like back end of 2017. my mentor, I was telling my mentor about this, and she said, well, when are you free? So well, I'm free in school hours. She was like, well, go canvassing then. Just, you know, you don't pick your estates full of young professionals where, you know, everyone's out, but, you know, who votes? Older people vote. You know, that's who votes. Or there's bungalows, and we've got lots of streets with lots of bungalows and lots of older people. And I mean, for one, they don't actually want you knocking on their door at 6 o'clock at night. You know, they, particularly in the winter, you know, they batten down the hatches. They're perfectly happy to chat to you at 1 o'clock on a Monday afternoon. And yeah, that made a massive difference for me, just getting my head around. We canvass during daylight hours in the week, you know, not at tea time. And I would definitely recommend. And I think the problem with that is often I end up doing it by myself and then saying to people, no, I'm really sorry, I can't come to the tea time canvassing slot. And obviously, you know, I appreciate that people work and not everyone's schedule's the same, but there are, and increasingly now, you know, there are lots of people who are around during the day. And I think we're going to see, even when all of this is over and we're allowed to canvass again, and that's more possible, I think a lot of people are going to be working from home for the foreseeable. A lot of people.
To be honest, that was always one of my sneaky canvassing things anyway, was actually if you go daytime canvassing on a Friday, like lots of people used to work from home on a Friday, but not other days. And like, actually, they're quite often happy to kind of come to the door and have a quick chat while they, you know, skive off work for 10 minutes. So one of my kind of sneaky tricks was always like, if I'm going to pick a day for daytime canvassing, Friday's the day, because there's just that slightly more people in, especially in those young professional areas where normally you just don't get anyone at that time. But yeah.
Go on, Dave.
I think it is a case of working smarter, not harder as well, because if you know the demographic of your area, I mean, we have elderly housing complexes. We have a lot of young families in the newer housing where you will find people in during the day because they're doing the same as you. So, and it is horses for courses, I suppose.
I think I found for me there was a sort of triage thing as well. So like one of the things that I really tried to be quite deliberate about was thinking about things that, like, especially like as my daughter got a little bit older and I was starting to put her in nursery and she was starting to struggle a little bit with longer canvassing sessions, like she'd just get bored. You know, I was really quite deliberate about like, well, actually, you know, I can take her to a meeting, and especially if it's in the office, like it might annoy the other people at the meeting and she might destroy a few things, but actually that's fine. Whereas I can't really take her on a delivery session. So if I've got her in nursery 2 days this week, I'm going to make sure that I'm delivering and canvassing for those 2 days. And I'm going to make sure that the meeting is scheduled for a day when I have her with me. And like, maybe that's a little bit annoying for people, but you know what, they'll cope. And, you know, similarly with emails, like actually I can kind of keep on top of emails while stopping her, you know, pulling the TV on her head or whatever she's trying to do. Whereas, well, no, not that, because I've got it attached to the wall before someone calls social services on me. But, you know, like whatever she's trying to destroy at that moment. But, you know, I can't go canvassing with her. So I think that really deliberate, like, what can I not do with a child, and what would it be easier to do without a child? And if it would only be easier, then you're going to have to suck it up and do it with your child. Whereas if it's something that you can't do with a child, that's the time to prioritize. That's the thing to prioritize for your child free time.
I want to just touch base on two things. So I'm reminded of, firstly, this is probably a quicker answer, is that one of our counsellors, he was on the council, then he went off, and then he's come back again. He had one of his daughter was still young. And like you guys said, and what we don't talk about is sometimes you have community meetings, which are always still about that time as well. And an opposition councillor reported him to standards for bringing his daughter along because he had no childcare at the time. Now, I mean,
I hope he press released it.
Yeah, well, it was before even I was elected. So I mean, we are going back to like 12 years or so there. But do opposition parties give you any grief regarding it? And then leading on from that is, what's it like with the council itself, with council officers and meetings? Because I had several jobs when I was a councillor, and obviously I don't have childcare issues, but some workplaces were absolutely rotten in accepting any sort of kind of time off for counsellor duties, and then you add childcare into that as well. How do you guys balance that with council meetings, council offices? Because I imagine listeners and viewers because we were talking about people starting from scratch. Maybe one of the things that stops women in particular from wanting to do it is thinking, how am I going to do it? I've got a job, I've got childcare, I've got everything else, and suddenly I've got to deal with council meetings as well, and it might put them off. Yeah. So how do you deal with that?
I think councils operate in one of two ways. So you either have councils that acknowledge that people work and tend to have all of their council meetings in the evenings, which I think is obviously a good thing for working people. I personally would find that really, really hard. You hear about council meetings that start at 7 p.m. and finish at midnight. And I'm not productive in the evenings. I think that's fair. I think I personally would find that, would find that quite difficult. But obviously, it works for some people and allows people to have full-time jobs as well, or you have councils like Barnsley, which assume no one works and have all of their meetings during the day, which works better for me really, because as I said, I've got sort of time free during the day. And to be fair, I have taken. We're obviously talking pre-COVID now. I have had occasions where there have been meetings during the school holidays. So there's been a licensing meeting in half term, or I'm on the member development working party. Nothing particularly outrageously crucial to the functioning of local government. I've had that, and things like area council, ward council, and I'm always super polite about it. I always pop the chair and the governance officer an email just to say, it's half term. I've got the kids. I'm going to have to bring them along. If the chair's got any problems with that, let me know, and I'll give my apologies instead. And it's genuinely never been a problem. My children are very taken with their screens and will quite cheerfully sit in the corner of a room and stare at that screen for as long as is required. And I think, I've never had any hassle. I think people generally sort of, think it's quite sweet and acknowledge that that's just part of me and part of what's required. I did have there was one Labour councillor who made a snotty comment. It wasn't just me, actually. A couple of other councillors had their kids with them as well, and he made a snotty comment about it being a creche, but he's a idiot anyway, so that's just him. But I just made it clear that there was no alternative. If I wanted a job where I had to put my kids into childcare all the time, I would get a job that paid me considerably better than being a local councillor. So I'm not paying to put my kids in childcare to come to council meetings. The one line I draw is at full council, because they're so utterly vile to me at full council. I would never sit my children in the public gallery and make them watch that. But as Laura says, these Zoom meetings, they're just so much better. It makes it so much easier, not having to drag your kids all the way into the town hall and set them up in the corner of the room. They're doing the same. They're still looking at their devices. But I've not had to drag them around to do that. So I think I think this is a really positive thing. But genuinely, I've not had any hassle from the council or from community meetings. My kids are, touch wood, they are actually pretty well behaved. But I can take them out in public and trust them to be adorable. So that that helps.
Dave,
in terms of council meetings, interestingly at South Ribble, I don't know how many other councils are doing this, but we had our full council last night, and we have hybrid meetings. So there'll be 30 people in the council chamber, socially distanced, spread out, and should be keeping away from each other. And then we have screens up on the wall where those not in the council chamber are phoning in as we are now, and they're taking part in the meeting. And it does work. So it may well be that if legislation enables it post-COVID, this could be the way forward in the future, where you can take part in a meeting without actually having to be there. I think there was one health scrutiny committee at county where there was somebody phoning in from Spain because he was on his holidays. He got his attendance in.
So, but I want to kind of come back to you, Dave, really, because obviously this isn't an age joke, I promise. But obviously, when you were dealing with childcare issues, you know, there wasn't Zoom meetings, there wasn't that availability. You took a step back from the cabinet, but then, you know, you suddenly were then deputy leader of the council, still with, you know, children in school. So how did you manage that with council? I mean, obviously they were school during the day, but was that a difficult thing to manage?
To a degree, yes. I mean, it helps when you've got two children as well, and one is somewhat older than the other one because they unfortunately get the job of babysitting the younger one. I mean, at South Ribble, very early on when I was first on the council, a decision was taken to move all the meetings to the evening because people worked during the day, and it was felt that working people were being excluded from the council. County council is typical of that, where you're one of the rare examples of not being a pensioner, I think, because everything does happen during the day, and if you have a full-time job, it's nigh on impossible. But again, when my wife was still alive, she was a member of the National Childbirth Trust, and we used to be a member of a babysitting circle where you earn tokens and paid with tokens and so on and so forth. And that was extremely helpful in terms of finding childcare.
Because it is important. I was just trying to find some figures, because I remember when I was really struggling, like I say, with work and being a counsellor, to the point where I thought I didn't know if I could continue because the bosses weren't there. And I think it's a ridiculous percentage, like only like 18% of counsellors were under pension age or something. And that was across the country. But it's really interesting because we did a push to get a council meeting moved from 1 till 2 to allow people who are in full-time work not to have to take a full day off, but just to take half day off. Now, I never even thought about how that would affect people who then would have to pick up their kids at 3 o'clock-ish at school. So is there a right answer to this, or is it the fact that you've got to have a mix of meetings, some in the evening, some in the day, in order to accommodate everyone?
Yes, I think so. And I think that I think to some extent, you can have that flexibility. You know, if there's no one on cabinet or on why not at the start of the year sit down all the members of Planning Regulatory Board and say, right, can we figure out a timetable of meetings that works for everyone? You know, if we have the meetings at 1 o'clock, is that a problem for anyone on board this year? If we have the meetings at 4 p.m, is that a problem for anyone on board this year? You know, why can't we have that? You know, when you agree the membership at the start of the council year, you know, why can we not just, because no one ever has that. You're told when your meetings are.
Yeah, that's right.
Obviously, it has to fit for officers as well. You know, that's an understanding. But you know, if you had that conversation, and if you sort of said, well, you know, my contribution is that I find 2 p.m. meetings really frustrating because I cannot get away from them in time to pick my kids up from school, and you know, I can't put them in childcare if you have that meeting on a Tuesday, that's fine, I'll put them in after school club. But if you have it on a Monday, I can't because they've got ballet. So I just had that conversation with you. Then if the answer was, look, we're really sorry, we've looked at all the options and this is the one that pleases most people, I think you'd be like, okay, well, you know, at least we've tried. But it's just, you know, those conversations just don't happen, and it is frustrating that you're kind of, you know, I guess
shoehorned into things. And I remember when that example we did, we were talking about trying to open up more democracy into Preston, and that move from that 1 hour move from 1 till 2. The uproar it caused. I mean, basically, there were some Tory councillors who said, well, why do you want to be a councillor if you can't commit to these times? And I said to them, you are limiting your talent pool to just people over 60. That's all you're doing. And so many times across, I mean, I'm quite rare in the fact that I was 27 when I was elected, and I stuck with it. Yeah. So many people under retirement age do a single term. Or don't even get through the single term and then call it a day. loads of them. So and it's just this psychology within local government that somehow, you've got to make it work. There's no. Like I said, what you've just said there, Hannah. No one has ever had that conversation at the start of the municipal year, saying, "Okay, you've all agreed who wants to be on which committee. Let's see what works for people."
Yeah, and if the answer is, do you know what, we can't find a way to please everyone, then then that's fine, isn't it? At least you've tried. I think it's engagement of, as you say, younger people into all politics. But I do think local politics. I think if you're an MP, you know the deal, don't you? Do you know what I mean? You're down in Westminster for 4 days a week, and how you manage that is a bigger.
You get paid a lot more money, and
let's be real,
like childcare is a problem that can be not completely solved, but largely mitigated by flinging money at it.
By throwing money at it, yeah. Absolutely.
Ultimately, if you're an MP, you make enough money that your spouse can be a full-time parent, or you make enough money that you can pay a nanny if that's what you need to make it work.
And I suspect the vast majority of MPs with children, have a significant amount of help like that in the form of a nanny. And for 10 grand a year, that's just not going to happen. So I do think that kind of engagement into local politics is a massive problem. And I completely acknowledge how lucky I am, because I don't have additional paid work on top of my council work. The flip side of that is that my husband is 100% the breadwinner, and I don't call on him for childcare, because I just can't. That's just never been an option for me. But I do think I absolutely think that these virtual or these hybrid meetings are a massive, massive opportunity to get more people involved. Not just from a childcare point of view, but also from a working point of view. If you think, well, I do my full-time job, but I now do it from home, and I can tell my employer that between 2 and 4 p.m. I'll be doing my council work. You're pulling out all of that commute time, all of that travel, all of that flicking between jobs, because all you're doing is switching what Zoom meeting you're in. It's massively time saving. I really hope we can keep it going forwards, because I do think this is without a doubt the answer to getting, or part of the answer to getting more people with kids involved. And for local party structures as well, our local party executive meetings, I don't think we'll have one in person again. I think we'll save our in-person meetings for socials. I think, why do you want to drive for half an hour to discuss some minor compliance issue with the Constitution?
And you can navel gaze at home,
have Netflix on in the background. Not that I would ever do that, obviously, but other people might.
In terms of trying to make it easier for younger people with children, I'm not far off a bus pass now, and I'm certainly conscious, because we have younger members on the council, and I'm certainly conscious of fitting in with them. And I would like to think that maybe older people now might have a wider view of how we make councils work and how we get people involved. Because the county council, John will tell you the same, that there's probably a raft of people on there who object to how you dress, object to just about everything going, because it doesn't fit in with their little world.
Well, we have there's a particular councillor, I won't name him, but every time a woman from the opposition stands up, he tells her to sit down, woman. Every time. And this is some of and actually this counts, and we don't have actually any female councillors there's only 4 of Lib Dems on the Lancs County group, but the outrageous comment, and because the people are just stuck in the past on this thing, and like I say, there's a Labour councillor now who brings her newborn baby into the chamber with her on full council as well, and fair play to Lizzie for doing that, and it's great to see. But it's grim sometimes, and I completely get when you said, Hannah, you don't bring yours into full council, because some of the bile that's thrown out in council. But that's another reason why people can get put off from this stuff. So, and I suppose what I want to get from this episode, sorry, Laura, is just there are options for you. Don't, the macho bullshit that comes out sometimes in councils, just put it to one side. You don't have to deal with it. Particularly now it's half virtual, you can just mute them or go do something else while they're gibbering on about something.
Yeah, I mean, if I could sort of put a slightly, because I feel like we're starting to come to the end of where we're getting to, and it's potentially a little bit depressing. If I could put a sort of slightly more positive spin, I think, honestly, for me, it really has been a positive. Like, I loved being able to campaign with my daughter. And I mean, one of the things that I really appreciated was that, it was more flexible than having a full-time job. And, if you do need to work full-time because you need the money, then obviously that's a different situation. But, if you do have the flexibility to, go part-time or even to stop working, then actually, staying, like, doing local politics, it's a fantastic way to, to be involved with your community, but also to be able to spend more time with your kids while also kind of building your skill set and staying in work. And like, actually, when I obviously lost the election and then had to apply for jobs, it was quite useful to be, an employer said, well, what have you been doing for the last year? And I was able to talk about being a PPC rather than just saying, well, I've been on maternity leave. And actually, obviously that's a much bigger social issue. I should not have had to hide maternity leave on my CV, but actually we know that is the reality for a lot of people. And I think one of the things that I'm really thinking about going forward is that actually, if I do stay doing politics, actually it is a lot more flexible than having a full-time job. And because good part-time jobs are so hard to find, they just don't exist. So, really the option is often between being a full-time parent and having a full-time job. And if you do want to try and find a middle way, politics can be a way to do that. And I think that is an important positive for people who do want to be able to spend more time with their kids, but who also, like Hannah, God love you, I don't know how you did it. Like, I could not be a full-time parent. I just couldn't do it. But, I would love to be able to work slightly fewer hours and spend more time with my daughter, and trying to find that middle way. I think politics can offer a way to do that.
I think Laura's right. And I think, yes, I agree. And I mean, and this is one of the reasons that I do enjoy it, because it is flexible. Being a counsellor gives me a small part-time income, having, for a long time, not had any independent source of income of my own. So, it gives me a small part-time income, and it is flexible. Obviously meetings are meetings, and meetings are when they are. But in terms of, when I meet with residents, or when I make phone calls, or when I answer emails, that's all completely flexible. And I think as well, when you're involved with your local community, there's actually some really quite fun stuff that we can do as a family. So again, it's so sad talking about this right now, because all of this stuff has been cancelled this year, and it's just so sad. But Penistone Show, Armed Forces Day, Penistone Gala, all of the summer fetes, all of the Christmas fetes, we go to those things as a family. I don't just go to those because I represent the ward that I live in, and the community that I live in, and the community where my kids go to school. And, so those things are part of living in the community and having a family in the community. And they're part of, being a counsellor and being that representative. And I drag my kids along to all of the village fun days, and, they have a great time, and I'm doing my bit for kind of, representing the village. And I think the other thing as well, because my girls are 7 and 11 now, they're quite political, because because they know what I do. And I don't talk about it too much, and I have to say we've not watched the news for about 2 years.
Good decision.
Yeah, it's just too depressing. But they are political, and they grow up understanding that politics is important, and politics is everything that we do, and that they understand campaigning, and they understand activism. My eldest daughter actually thinks the entire thing is mortifying, because I am not being a counsellor and not being a candidate, and I am the parent who will go marching into school to make a massive fuss about why they're not allowed to wear their earrings for PE. My daughters, I was that parent all through primary school. I'm still that parent. My daughter's just gone up to secondary school, and there's this absolutely ludicrous rule that they're not allowed to wear boots. So they cannot wear ankle boots. And I'm just like, why not? This is Penistone. Like, we live on the edge of the Pennines. Like, it rains for 50% of the year. I wear boots all winter because otherwise my feet get wet. How exactly does it enhance children's learning to have wet feet all day? And I'm this far from right into the head and causing a massive fuss about it. And Libby is just like, can you please just let someone else do
I was wondering when we were going to get the first Hannah Kitchen rant, and I wasn't going to expect it on boots. That's what Dave.
I'm rather hoping you don't come to the day when, because I've had this, when there's a knock at the door and they've come to complain about your child, and you should know better because you're a local councillor.
Well, I
once had a police officer tell me the same thing. He said, "Oh, you get that as well, do you?"
What? No, what? You didn't have a police officer come into your door. A police officer also said, "Right, okay, there, I got the wrong end of the stick."
I have had a police officer come to my door, and that's when I taught my child to go and be a nuisance somewhere else and not on his own doorstep.
Yeah. Fortunately, they have yet to say that about my 2-year-old, but I think I have that to come.
The other thing, something else has jumped into my head as well. I think the other thing is that I think people like seeing someone who looks like them in politics. So, no offense to the white men amongst us this evening, but there are a lot of slightly older white men involved in politics, and and some of them are superb and some of them are not superb. But I think I get approached a lot by young women with families who've got an issue that I think they perhaps wouldn't approach another counsellor over, because I don't hide the fact that I've got a family. I've always been that's always been sort of part of who I am, and open about where I live and where my kids go to school. And I do think it's useful, and I think it makes you more open and approachable to people. When people see me kind of dragging my kids through town, gritting my teeth because they're complaining about something, that's the same for a lot of people, that they've been there. And for Laura, when she's standing on a doorstep and her daughter's making a bit of a fuss, the vast majority of people can empathise with that because they've been there. So I find it a positive, really.
Well, I just want to thank all three of you for being on the show this evening. Thank you for your time. Actually, it's really encouraging as well, because I do worry some local parties, as one of the Lib Dems, think, do we want to ask X because she must be busy. She must be busy. And actually, the thing is, don't assume anything. Just if they're good enough and they're willing enough, then that nothing else matters really. But thank you, David. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Hannah. We'll wait for Hannah's next suggestion of a topic. It might be shoe related. We're not sure. But whatever it is, we will do an episode on it. But thank you everyone for listening or watching this podcast. We really appreciate your time. Do subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes going forward. You can follow everything to do with the podcast at LibDem Pod on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Do follow these guys. I mean, David's not on social media as much as the other two, but those two certainly are, and they're always worthwhile to see what rant they're having about today. So thank you so much for watching and listening, and we'll be back with another episode very soon.